Aurora supports cluster export to S3 directly into Parquet format. So why is this good? Why is this useful?
So there are so many scenarios where you need to dump out data out of Aurora and get it in a format which is immediately consumable by Glue or one of the other services for analytic purposes. So Aurora is basically a relational database, right? If you're going to try and do OLAP kind of queries on Aurora, it's going to be incredibly painful. You want to dump it out into S3 and use Athena or something like that on it so that you can build up those OLAP cubes. Try If you start using your traditional um, Aurora database, which is primarily being used for OLTP purposes, then you're going to run into a whole lot of performance issues. Or let me try to explain this in a much more simpler way. For most people, you start using Aurora databases like an OLTP database, right? It's for your transactions. You're doing a whole lot of queries, you know, your standard CRUD operations. That's great. And then suddenly another part of your application comes along, and this is business intelligence or BI capabilities. Now you want to slice and dice your data for reports and analytics and stuff like that. Taking the same Aurora database and trying to do all these crazy slicing on it is just kind of like an anti-pattern on this Aurora database. Number one, it just spikes up the load on this instance like crazy. And then suddenly you're going to have customers not being able to do regular transactions because your OLAP queries are taking forever, or they're inefficiently written, or whatever the use case might be. So that is exactly where being able to take a dump of your data or certain kinds of queries and being able to dump it into Parquet format, which is already optimized for loading into things like um, Athena, makes so much sense. Then you can let Athena do all the heavy lifting for your OLAP based querying.
I'm so glad they didn't say dump it into CSV format. I'm so glad we're finally seeing the death of that. That try and write a CSV parser that actually works.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'm glad we're seeing a good mature format like Parquet, and like I said, without creating a snapshot first and during the export. This is pretty cool. Does not impact the performance of the Aurora database.
Exactly.
Right back in the earlier days, you have to say, okay, you'd run your analytics or batch jobs at night because the database would slow
Correct.
to a crawl. You'd have some full index, full node scans in there. Why
Exactly.
index when you can just read the whole thing? you know. So
Now that
now,
the world is 24/7, that you never have one of those windows where you can run these kind of bad jobs anymore. You just don't have the
yeah,
luxury.
well, it's yeah. So it's really neat that you could get this data out, and even during the export, you're not going to affect the runtime because someone's going to need it.
Correct. Exactly. So you can do these exports often enough without any performance penalties and make sure that all your analytics gets as close to real time as possible.
And let's see. So we have a. This is supported in a bunch of regions.
Yeah, this is actually really, really simple. Uh, there's an API for it. There's the console, the CLI. You can do this in all kinds of different ways. Um, this is actually a really, really neat and simple announcement. So I definitely give it a big simplifies.
Get the, here we go. Simplifies.
And this should get a 4.5 as well.
I really like that you don't have to create a snapshot first because it's something that you can
Yes,
do and then forget about. And unless you have some infrastructure to tell you when the snapshot's done, then it's
correct.
just one more thing to remember. So saying, okay, dump it right into this S3 bucket, and that's the only when the file shows up in S3, there's not another step. You're ready to get started
Correct.
with your analysis.
Exactly. And actually, if you worked out a good partition scheme in S3, like it might be by date, it might be by some specific kind of ID, or by hour, by minute, whatever. If you set that up really well, then as soon as this dump reaches S3, it can trigger the glue event that parses only the new files, updates your you know indexes, and updates all of your analytics. And yeah, the data gets available to you in almost no time. And it's not like you're parsing. Or one of the other big problems that we used to have in the past was every time you did a database dump, it was effectively a snapshot, right? So every time you're doing a snapshot of the entire database because you don't know what got updated, what changed, things were usually a big mess. Then you needed to basically run the entire glue parser across the entire snapshot itself, which is ridiculous when you have very, very large data sets. So this makes it really easy to create a incremental dump that you can refer to with glue and just keep updating your indexes.
Awesome. All right. Well, we'd had some pretty high scoring articles here. So nice work, AWS.
Yep, I think the average is definitely going up.
Well, I think that's all the time we have for this show. Ro, it was really fun to see you again, and we'll see to our audience. We'll see you next week with Darko Mazarosh, and we'll be talking serverless, retro computing, CDKs. We'll talk about reInvent, which at that point we'll have 2 weeks to go, and
Yep.
and hopefully so we'll get to see one of those old school terminals as well. I think that'd be a lot of fun.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stephen. And